Welcome to the Grants for Emerging Researchers Clinicians Mentorship Program Proposal Writing Workshop. That is a mouthful, or the GERM Proposal Writing Workshop. My name is Amari Pearson Fields, and I am the Director of Programs for the Infectious Diseases Society of America Foundation, and I will be serving as your moderator today. So in today's workshop, we will be providing an overview of the GERM program, as well as giving you some tips and tricks for preparing and submitting your application. You'll have an opportunity to ask questions in the chat throughout the length of the workshop, so please feel free to post your questions. We will be taking a break during the workshop, and we ask that you raise your hand at that time to ask your questions directly of the panelists. And in terms of our panelists, we have the chair and vice chair of our GERM program committee, Dr. Ellen Eaton and Dr. Florence Monplaisir. I love saying that. Dr. Plaisir will be providing the overview of the GERM program, and Dr. Eaton will be providing additional specific information on preparing your application. So without further ado, I will turn it over to our presenters.
Thank you so much, Amari, and welcome everyone. Although we want to dedicate the first part of the presentation to give you some basic information, this session is really meant to be interactive. So as Amari said, please type your questions as they come up and we'll go through them later on. So the purpose of the program is to really allow medical students to have early exposure to research in infectious diseases. And we define this very broadly. It can be HIV or any other infectious disease. And there are very broad categories that you can apply based on your research interest. So we do fund applications that are basic science oriented, that focus on clinical epidemiology or clinical research, on medical education, and also on quality improvement. And also because we realize that some medical students want to have more hands-on experience, clinical experience with infectious disease, we also allow this as part of the program. The duration of the program is a year, and you receive a $4,000 stipend for your research project. Next. And so the goal of this workshop is really to provide an overview of the program as you're in sort of this contemplative stage to decide whether you want to apply or not, and also offer guidance to develop a strong research proposal and answer your questions. Next. So who can apply? You're eligible to apply if you are a first, second, or third year medical student. And the reason why fourth years are not eligible is because the program takes a year and you would be starting residency. And so we accept applicants from first, second, and third year of medical school. You can be in a combined MD and PH or MD PhD program, but you don't necessarily have to. But you do need to be a US citizen or permanent resident. You can, however, be pursuing medical school outside of the US. So we do accept students who, for example, are in the Caribbean and attending medical school there. Next. So some of the frequently asked questions that we get that we thought might be helpful as we present this is, does GERM support qualitative research projects? And absolutely we do. We support, as I mentioned before, a broad range of research projects as long as the research question is important and that you come up with a good method to actually pursue what you say that you want to pursue in the proposal. It's totally acceptable. The second question is, does a project need to focus on a single infectious diseases? And projects in general need to be related to the field of ID or HIV. They can be public health oriented, focus on antimicrobial stewardship, resistance, vaccine or vaccination. And so in general, as long as you stay focused within the domain of an infectious disease, whether it's HIV or otherwise, you should be okay. And can funding be used to cover the cost of travel expenses? And absolutely it can. Some applicants in the past have had projects globally, particularly in sub-Saharan Africa. And we've funded such projects where the applicants proposes to go and travel on site to help complete their project. So that's totally acceptable. The use of stipend for living expenses is also allowed to protect time to complete the project. And for more information on other frequently asked questions, the link to the website is included here, and we can also post it in the chat if that's helpful to you. Next. Okay, so we can pause here and see if there are any questions about that portion of the presentation before we move on to the next set of slides.
Florence, it looks like there's a question in the chat about using the funding for technology and or supplies.
Oh, great. Thank you, because I missed that. Yes, as long as the use of expenses are justified and it falls into the scope of your research project, absolutely. Yes.
And
all right.
Alyssa has
okay,
raised her hand that she has a question.
Yes, and I think Chris said, I'm interested in the program, but I don't have a mentor or research topic lined up. Is there support to help students develop a research project? Absolutely, Chris, and actually we have a slide touching on that later on. We realize that people or students have a diverse spectrum of exposure when it comes to their to having mentors, and we're very committed to helping you find a mentor if you don't have one. The best research questions are the ones that come from you instead of somebody else, but we can help you formulate a research question with your mentor. And so that's very possible. And Ellen, I don't know if you want to weigh in on that a little bit more.
No, I mean, I already know of one student who's reached out about needing a mentor that someone on the IDSA team has connected. So yeah, we do have those resources available. And there's several other questions that have come up that are not necessarily on this section. I'd like to answer those at the end if that's okay. But we will get to these additional questions specifically around timeframe and funding. So if you have any, someone had raised their hand actually. Oops, I didn't mean to raise my hand. I was looking for who had raised theirs.
It was Alyssa that raised her hand, but I'm not. Fallon,
Okay.
can you help us turn her mic on so that she could ask a question?
Absolutely. We have two Alyssas in attendance, if you could confirm.
Okay.
Alyssa Loeffler.
She said it was answered. Okay, so maybe that's why she took her
Okay,
hand
great.
down. Okay, great. And for those other questions, we'll get to those, and feel free to keep putting those in the chat as we go along. All right.
Thanks so much.
Florence, are you okay if we keep moving?
Yes.
All right, sounds good. If we could advance to the next slide. Okay, so I am Ellen Eaton again, and thanks for joining. Florence did a great job getting us started. We wanted to give you an example of some successful grantee language to really inspire your thoughts as you're thinking about your proposal. This is a funded proposal from past. Really clear here. We chose this because the language is very clear. The project title, they titled it Evaluation of Access to Sexual Health Services Among Recent U.S. Immigrants. They selected a project category, which these categories will be available to you in the application. So you can select together with your mentor which group of categories is most appropriate for your science. If you miscategorize, you're not sure, feel free to reach out to us or just select the one you think is the best fit. And it has happened in the past that we've recategorized if we thought maybe your study fit better in a different category than you selected. Next. Okay, so this is a section from the background of a prior successful application. You can see how they were very clear about their goals. So here they state the goal of this project will be to identify facilitators and barriers that recent immigrants face in presenting for sexual health services. So very clear. They gave an example of where their data is coming from and how it will be used in various steps of their study. So make sure that as you develop your project, you are very clear in answering each of the requirements in the funding and stating explicitly, here are my goals. Here's where I state my goals so that we're not digging for them and so that it's very clear exactly what you aim to accomplish. Next slide. Provide specific details on how you will carry out your project. This has a 300-word limit. Here you can see that same study, and they broke it down into 3 stages. They made it very clear for the reviewers how they will develop this under stage 1, survey development. They mentioned their mentor and how they'll work with their mentor. They give some clinic leadership. They list the specific clinics they're working with. They even tell us that how the survey will be translated and delivered in different languages. So this is an application where we can tell that this candidate has met with a mentor who could really help them drill down into the details of how they would do their work. And it just highlights that they're prepared, they're interested, they're committed, and they've thought through this project. And then they proceeded to talk through the second and third phases. They told us information about their participants, and the specific sites as well, the mobile clinic that they'd be working with throughout their 3 stages that they've told us about here. Next slide. This is a really important section about how you and your mentor will plan to engage in the project. Several students in the past have asked about virtual work. This is coming up more and more just because of the pandemic. It is possible to have a mentor who is located in another site. Just be very clear about how you will interact with them. If you're going to have a Zoom call every week, wonderful. Tell us how you'll do that, when you'll start, what you'll talk about. If you're able to physically go to the site, maybe it's a driving distance and you're going to go once a month, once a quarter, please tell us about that. We want you to be able to physically interact in person to the extent you're able, but you won't be penalized if your project is happening somewhere where you're not physically able to go. We also do sponsor studies that have happened in other countries. So if somebody is going to do a project in Uganda, for example, around HIV prevention, tell us how that interaction with the mentor will happen. Again, you won't be penalized if your mentor lives elsewhere. We just need to know that you have a relationship, whether it's a virtual or in person, and how you're going to interact with that demographic. Next slide. Why are you interested in pursuing an infectious disease or HIV related project? This is also very important. Please describe your interest in general ID or HIV. Tell us what you're interested in and why. If you had a really impactful experience as an undergraduate student or as a high schooler, please tell us about that. Tell us how you have done volunteer work or shadowed in clinics, etc., along the way to really foster those interests. Describe your goals and tell us specifically how this project may help you develop into the infectious disease or HIV physician or scientist or both that you'd like to become in the future. I would say it is often clear when applicants are not interested in infectious diseases or HIV. We love that people are interested in gastroenterology or allergy immunology, but it is often clear that this may not be the best fit for you. That's why I'm asking you, if this is your primary interest, please be explicit, because the overall mission of this award is to support trainees who will help us grow our workforce towards infectious disease and HIV clinical and research work. So it is not the best fit for you if you have already decided you're going to be a cardiologist. If you, on the other hand, are interested in ID, you're not 100% sure, you need more experience, you need exposure, you want to work with this infectious disease doc that you've met with on a clinical rotation, or maybe he's in a rural community and has a mentored clinical experience, he or she, and this is the opportunity that's going to help you really make up your mind. Tell us about that. We want to help you use this opportunity to really get you committed to a career in infectious disease. Do you have anything, Florence, to add on that?
Yeah, no, I would say that in addition to what Ellen mentioned, is that it's very important that one, you identify your research idea clearly, that you clearly describe this, and feasibility is also something that we look for because you have a year to do this, and also your ongoing relationship with your mentor is important. You know, as Ellen said, how often you're going to be meeting with them. We just want to make sure that you're going to have the support that you need to actually carry out the research project.
Thank you. Next slide. Okay, how can the grant be used to support your project? Here's an example of someone who's using their funding to encourage participation and recruitment. Maybe they are going to need some incentives to compensate their participants. Maybe they need some study samples to be processed. Maybe they're doing HIV testing, or maybe they're building a database and they need some support to develop a REDCap database. Those would be some examples. Here they've said that they're going to rely on their mentor to help identify the best way to compensate their study participants and partners. That's great. If all of your details are not ironed out, give as much detail as you can, and definitely lean on your mentors and the clinics or sites that you're working with to help you with this. And here they've stated if funding in excess would be used for living expenses, which, as we mentioned previously, is totally appropriate. Several of the questions in the chat ask about timeframes. We've had, although the most traditional applicant is a student who's applying in the summer between their first and second years, we've had individuals who use this for a more longitudinal experience. Maybe they have some elective time later in the year. Just be very clear with us when you're going to use this funding and the duration of that project. And when you give us your goals and objectives, make sure that you're not telling us an unrealistic goal, that you're going to accomplish the whole study in 1 month, right? That for many projects, you can't accomplish them in 1 month. So just be thoughtful about the time frame you have available, how you're going to work with your mentor, how you will accomplish these goals so that we know it's feasible and it's not totally unrealistic. But if you don't have it just within the summer elective experience, that is okay. And we've had successful awardees in the past who had a different timeline for whatever reason. Maybe they're taking a gap year. We've seen that as well. Let me just look at those questions. The time frame. It can be an ongoing project, Carrie. Does it go directly to the student or to the institution? This is a question I think I need one of the IDSA team members to answer. I don't remember if it goes straight to the student. Andrea, can you remind me on that?
Sure. Yeah, it typically goes directly to the student, but some institutions prefer that it go through them. And so we can accommodate either. So there's flexibility there too.
Great. One thing that we do not encourage, we do not want this funding to go to a mentor to fund their work. We do not necessarily want to purchase new lab equipment that a faculty member will be using. This really needs to go to support the applicant, their experience, the resources and support that they need to get their work done, not to support someone else's research career. Are projects of secondary data analysis considered, or should there be a primary data collection? Certainly, so secondary data collection for those on the call often refers to an existing database. Maybe I have collected data on hospitalized patients with endocarditis, and I have a student who wants to go through and look at MRSA versus MSSA and how that impacts outcomes. And I have that data in a database, but I've never done anything with it. I haven't looked at it. I haven't run the analyses. Certainly, if that is a project that you're, the type of project you're interested in, maybe your mentor has access to a database, but you need some financial support, maybe to do some additional coding. Maybe you need software. Maybe you need to have IRB related costs. Maybe you just need living expenses and you want to use funds to put a poster presentation in and do that at ID week next year. That would be an acceptable project. And we have had secondary data analyses who have been funded. I will say it's really important in that case that you show us why that project is yours and why you're interested in it, not that you're just finishing a PhD student's project that they never finished last year, or you're hopping on somebody else's project and you're helping them get it off the finish line, you really need to demonstrate why this secondary data is important to you and how you're going to use that to answer your own clinical questions together with your mentor or a mentorship team. I should have said that earlier. You can have more than one mentor. You can have a clinical mentor and a PhD mentor. But make sure if it's analysis of somebody else's data, tell us how that's going to help you, not how that's going to help Dr. Eaton finish a paper that she hasn't gotten around to yet. So make sure you make it yours. All right, I think we're getting close to the end. Next slide. Mentor and additional support. So your mentor, remember, this could be a research experience or it could be a mentored clinical experience. So your mentor may not be a scientist, it may be a physician. Provide his or her name, phone and email. Let the mentor know that they'll be asked to upload a letter of recommendation and either a bio sketch or a CV. And then if there is a mentorship team, or maybe there's a clinical fellow or a postdoctoral student that you're going to be working with, or a statistician who's going to help you, describe them. We don't need to know their CV or bio sketch, but just tell us who they are and how they're going to help you support your work to get your goals achieved in the timeline you've allotted. That'll help us, and we certainly encourage teams if that's something that is available to you as part of your study. And then, as we mentioned earlier, if you need help finding a mentor, that is possible. Co-mentors, Jessica, do not need to write a letter. Just your primary mentor needs to write a letter of recommendation. Okay, next slide. Scoring. Scoring criteria. We look at the relevance and the novelty of the project and the topic. We look at the structure of the mentorship plan. How often are you meeting? What is the nature of the interaction? The candidate's interest in infectious diseases or HIV. Contributions to diversity are definitely a priority for us, including populations underrepresented in medicine, geography, program size, and academic foci. So if you are at an institution where there's not a division of infectious diseases, please do not be discouraged. That is totally appropriate. And in fact, we would love to have more candidates who are reaching out to us with interest, even though they don't have a strong infectious disease infrastructure in their training institution. Strength of the project plan as it relates to increasing the applicant's analytic, research, and clinical skills. Next slide. Okay, for your checklist for your application, complete the online application. You'll need to complete your CV, the mentor's letter of recommendation, and the mentor bio sketch or CV by February 6th of this year. And I think that brings us to our final slide, which is just the question link or the question slide. Let's see, I think there are some more questions that came in. Okay, Amanda asked, Mentor and I are planning on a project that includes a research component, but also a shadowing clinical component. Is that okay? Yes, we love that. That's a great way to make your research experience sticky if you are pairing it with a bedside experience, so that what the clinical questions you're asking and querying in your research opportunity are complementary to the type of patients you're seeing. And so yes, a hybrid experience where you have some shadowing and some research time is encouraged, and I think a great pairing for this funding opportunity. I should have clicked answering this live, but I think I've resolved most of these questions. If you have an outstanding question, please put it in the chat.
There's one that says, can funding be used solely for living expenses, or does a portion have to be used for project activities?
Andrea, I think so.
I mean, it's usually unusual that you have no expenses related to the project unless you're getting integrated into an infrastructure that is well funded, and your contribution is limited. For example, I'm thinking if you're doing a secondary data analysis, right, where you don't have to necessarily provide incentive to participants, etc. But sometimes there are expenses, for example, associated with acquiring the statistical software that you're going to need to use to do your data analysis. So usually there is some level of expense related to the project. Funding is not a score-driven criteria, meaning that we don't score your application based on how you spend your funds, but we want to make sure that the way that you're spending the funds are aligned with the project. And so in the situation where you have literally no expenses, it should be okay. Andrea, you can sort of confirm to use that for living expenses. But usually there are at least a minimal amount of expenses related to the project.
And yeah, just to confirm, yes, it's really about just justifying that you have the resources you need to complete the project.
I think one question we would have as reviewers, if that is the case, is do you really need, can you otherwise do this experience without the funding? And if so, you may look less competitive than someone who absolutely cannot do this experience without the funding, if that makes sense. So a candidate who's in a low resource setting, they're going to need X, Y, and Z to even do this project. And then you have another candidate who says, I got it all lined up. I just, want to be doing this in X city and I need, funding. So I think demonstrating that without this opportunity, you can't be as successful as you'd like to be will be important in your application. And talk to your mentor about this. They may say, oh, well, you could use it for, poster presentation, publication fees, go to ID week. Those are all things that you may want to consider, even if your lab resources are all supplied for you. Okay, and then I see another question. Okay, actually a few other. Paige asked, I'm gonna field this to you, Florence, if that's okay. Are applications reviewed on a rolling basis, or are they reviewed all together after the deadline?
That's a very good question. So we wait until we compile all the applications. We try to classify them based on the type of application, so basic science, clinical, etc., QI, and then we send them out to the reviewers, and then we have a meeting to sort of rank and decide who will get funded. So it's not done on a rolling basis. We do wait until all the applications are submitted. Having said that, please don't wait till the last minute to submit your application. Try to submit it early, just because there are always delays. For example, your mentor sending the letter, or if there is a last minute glitch on the system, we want to make sure that your application goes through. So please try to do it as soon as you can.
Great. Someone asked, if we are working on an existing project, does the timeline need to fall within the period July 1st, 2023 to June 2024? Can we wrap up the project before this period? That's fine. If you finish early, that's great. I'm going to read the next one to Florence. Florence, is it acceptable to apply for other sources of funding, for example, institutional funding, in conjunction with the GERM grant?
Absolutely. We just want you to be successful with what you do. We are not going to limit you based on funding. And so it's totally acceptable. For example, if you use the GERM funds to cover a certain amount of expenses for your project, but then you realize that there are additional costs that you didn't take under consideration, please apply for institutional funds. We're committed to you as a person and want to make sure that you're successful.
Great. Okay, a follow-up question about hybrid project. Can the shadowing be just in general infectious diseases, or does it need to be directly related to the focus of research? Does not have to be directly related to the focus of research. If it's unrelated, general exploration of clinical ideas, okay. Yes, that's totally okay. Yep. All right, Florence, another question for you. Is there a formal rubric we can find?
Can you expand on that a little bit? What do you mean by formal rubric?
I think that was from an anonymous
okay.
Chat.
Oh, you mean like a past application? Is that what you mean? Like, can you have access to a successful application?
You know, it's a good question. I wonder if this poster has looked at the actual application, because it does break down each of these sections that we addressed into specific sections. So, so I
think
they're asking about how it's
scored. Yes, and okay. So we do have. Ellen, do you mind going back to the slides with the score?
Not at all.
Okay, thank you so much. So we go through those criteria literally to decide how to score your application. How relevant is this? I mean, it doesn't have to be a completely novel, like I'm gonna save the world or create this new, cure that, but I think something that would advance the field is important. So understanding as you write the application to clearly explain how you're contributing to the field. Structure of the mentorship plan, again, it's important that we want to make sure that you have the support that you need. So I will say it again, it's important to say how often you're meeting with your mentor, what the mentorship plan is, and sometimes there are small opportunities to learn something. So for example, I'm not going to use the word training because that's a very strong word. But for example, if you can attend a seminar series that your mentor is involved with, like things like that, I think we just want to make sure that you're acquiring the skills that you need for this project, but also skills that will help you later on. Your interest in ID, like Ellen said, it's important because the goal of this program is to foster interest and careers in infectious diseases or infectious disease research, and contribution to diversity, and also just in general how your project comes together in terms of how strong it is with what you're planning to measure, what your outcomes will be, how you're planning on doing it. So these are literally the score criteria that we use for the application.
Thanks, Florence. A couple more. Can you clarify about joint project rules with other students? For example, if a work is going to be primarily done between my mentor and I, is it against GERM rules to have the classmate help implement a study who may ultimately be third authors? That is totally acceptable. We have seen those joint projects. I would just spell out how, I would think of them like that additional team member that I mentioned earlier. If Joe Smith is your colleague and you're going to be setting up the database and you're going to be querying charts and entering data in the database, and Joe Smith has an MPH and he's going to help you run the data analyses and you're going to write up the project together, tell us that. Tell us how people are going to work together to help you achieve your goals. I think the main thing to avoid is using this opportunity to continue someone else's project or to help someone else meet their goals. It just needs to be very clear that this is a project that's going to support you in your professional development. Florence, I'm going to field one to you. Can the project be started before the July 1st date?
I feel like that's more of an Andrea question. I would say that the project period and the funding period is for that year. I mean, if there are small things that you can work on, like submitting your IRB, absolutely. Like, I think if you want to start moving things along to position you for success, because we realize that that's not the only thing you're going to be doing. You're still a medical student, you have rotations, etc. So the program itself officially, has those dates, but I would say, and I would let Andrea confirm, that it's okay to start working on things, particularly because the IRB takes a long time. I would say that that's totally fine.
Totally agree. And just to confirm that, and also sometimes the project may be part of a larger project. So if the larger project has already gotten underway, a research project, and then this will be a part of that that starts a little bit later, that we have seen as well too, that I'm sure, I don't know, Dr. Zeaton or Montplaisir, if you would like to comment on that, but.
I think it's a point of strength when a candidate in their application can say, I've met with my mentor. I've already done a data query of this. I'm working on a quality improvement project already. Here's what I found, and I'm going to use the funding that's not going to come till the future, but the funding's going to help me build on what I've already done, because it just demonstrates a commitment to the field and a commitment to your research. So I would encourage you to tell us about what you've already done or what you plan to do. Anything else, Florence?
No, I think you said it well.
Okay, another question from Kim. When you say contributions to diversity, do you mean it would be helpful if our project would contribute to diversity, or is the criteria more for the applicants personally? And if we could go back to the slide where we talk about the candidate diversity, but to answer you, we do specifically look for diversity in our candidates to grow a diverse and representative workforce in infectious diseases. But we certainly are all, as IDDOTs, committed to serving patient populations that represent a broad range of race, ethnicity, geography, gender, and sexual minorities. So I think this is a slide on candidacy, but we all certainly value diversity in your patient populations as well. Florence, anything on that?
No, I think you said it well. Nothing to add.
All right. Oh, did I miss some? Okay, some additional information in the chat. Andrea has added the facts and the scoring criteria. And then I think that is everything from the Q&A. Does anyone see any outstanding questions or comments?
No, I would also point out that Andrea put in the chat her email address. So if you're interested in getting help with finding a mentor, please reach out to her.
All right, well, it's been a great session. Thank you for these questions. I think this is the most thoughtful in terms of questions we've gotten on the fly, Florence, compared to previous years. So this group came prepared, and we're excited to see your applications and review them. Anything else, Amari, Andrea, or Fallen, that we need to add before we say goodbye?
No, I would just like to thank our chair and co-chair. You did a wonderful job of fielding the questions and providing the information. And thank you to our guests for your thoughtful questions. We hope we see all of you in the application pool this year. If you have any additional questions that come to mind after this, please email Andrea. And we will be happy to assist you with the application process. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone, and Happy New Year.
If that's all, thank you very much, and everyone have a wonderful weekend.